Golden hour is supposed to be the best time for photography, but I have an issue with it because sometimes, even when I get perfect golden light, my photos still feel random and empty. So I went through my favorite photos from the last 5 years, and most of them weren't even shot during golden hour. And they all shared three things that make them feel more personal and meaningful to me. So in this video, I'm going to show you what these three things are and how you can use them to take photos that you're proud of, no matter how good the light is. So the first C in this framework stands for context, and that alone is going to change the way you see potential photos everywhere you go, and also how you tell stories with your photos. So this is perfect for you if you only have time to shoot on a cloudy Sunday, or when you're traveling with your partner or your friends and you can't shoot every place you're visiting at golden hour. So sometime 2 or 3 years ago, I read this quote that made me realize how important context is for storytelling with your photos. And the funny thing is, the quote wasn't even related to photography. The quote is from the British writer John le Carré, who said that the cat sat on a mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat is a story. So just adding this little bit of context of who the mat belongs to is enough to create a story in your head, be it about a fight or a friendship or whatever. So if we apply this to photography, your photo needs two things: a main character like the cat and a supporting character like the dog. Because the moment you add a supporting character that relates to your subject, your photo stops being a photo of a subject, and instead it becomes a story about your subject and the supporting character. So, how do you give context in your photos? Well, there is a couple of ways, but I'm going to give you two of my favorite ways that you can use right away. So, my first tip works in any light, requires zero equipment aside from your camera, and is probably the easiest way to instantly make your photos feel more intentional. And on top of that, it's going to help you tell a much stronger story with every shot that you take. So, my tip is to use frames. These are essentially things that encapsulate your subject, and they're a very easy way to make your photos look more interesting. But don't be fooled by how easy it is to find frames. I used to just use anything I could find as a frame and feel like, yeah, this is so sick, dude. But the thing is, while my photos did look more interesting, they didn't really tell much of a story. So the real level up for my photography happened when I started using frames to give the viewer context, because that's how you create a much stronger story with your photo. For example, by using frames to give your viewer information about the environment of your subject. Or what I also like to do is use frames to give the viewer context about the situation in which I took the photo. For example, when my subject itself is very far away and I can only use my own environment to give context. That way, my photos tell a little more about the story of my own journey. So whenever I finish a trip, I don't just have the bucket list shots, I also have a collection of memories that I made along the way. And maybe the best part about frames is that they work in any kind of light, be it harsh light or cloudy days. So you can use them anytime, anywhere, and you don't need to pray for golden hour to hit. Okay, frames are one way to give context, but you can't, of course, always use them or it'll just get too repetitive. And that's where my second tip for creating context comes in. And this one is probably my favorite way to give context because you can use it anywhere in the world and you don't need perfect light. And it's actually going to make your photography feel a little more personal and more unique than any landmark shot ever could. And I'm talking about finding shots that make your viewers stop and ask themselves how the things in your photo fit together. And once you learn how to see these shots, your photos will become much more rounded. And I call these common but unusual shots. But the thing is, most photographers miss these kinds of shots because when they visit a new city, they look up the most iconic shots, probably on Instagram, and they spend their whole trip chasing those shots. And I mean, I get it. I love taking shots of landmarks as well. But if that's all you shoot, you end up with a portfolio that looks like everyone else's. So, if you want your photography to feel a little more personal, you need to take these common but unusual shots. So, to take these, pay close attention during the everyday moments and the common places that most people just walk by. For example, during your commute, maybe when you find a random side street or the corner of a market that doesn't look very promising. And then look for the one thing that doesn't quite belong in that place or that makes it look different from what you'd usually expect. Or you can also combine your epic subject with everyday moments that most people miss because they're so focused on getting that shot that they saw on Instagram. And when you mix those shots with your big landmark shots, your whole photo set starts to feel like a story. And instead of being a highlight reel, it'll be more of a proof that this photo set is the story of your journey to the place that everyone loves to visit. Real quick, if you're finding this useful, I'm putting together everything I teach on this channel into a full photography guide. And instead of teaching dry technique, it'll be more of a step-by-step breakdown of everything you need to know to take photos that express your own artistic vision. You can sign up for the waitlist via the top link in the description. Now back to the framework. So those are two of my favorite ways to give your photos context. And if you start using even one of them, I promise you, your photos are going to feel a lot more intentional. But the thing is, context is only the first piece of the puzzle because you might nail your framing or you might have an interesting subject, but your photos can still end up looking flat, especially on cloudy days when everything just looks gray, or when it's the opposite and it feels like the sun is highlighting every little distraction. So that's where the second C of our framework comes in: contrast. But there's two types of contrast, and I think the second one is even more powerful to create meaningful images than the first one. But let's talk about the elephant in the room first. Because when the light is quote unquote bad, like on cloudy days or in harsh light, our photos often lack tonal contrast. So the difference between light and bright portions. And that makes it super hard for your subject to stand out, which is why we as photographers often tend to avoid shooting in these conditions. But what if I told you you could create contrast without even editing your photos? So the solution is really simple. It's to shape the light in camera. And that way, if the light doesn't fall the way you want it to, you can make it fall differently. So anything that blocks the light in a certain portion of your composition allows you to shape the light. For example, you can use a building to cut the harsh light so it only falls onto your subject. Or on cloudy days, you can use bridges or building entrances to block a portion of the light. And that way you create a nice gradient from light to dark that creates a much more interesting contrast than you'd normally have on these days. So there's lots of different ways to achieve this effect. And I'll be honest, I still don't love shooting on cloudy days, but with this technique, it just becomes a little more fun and a little more rewarding. So, shaping the light in camera is great to create contrast. But what happens when you're somewhere with nothing to shape the light with? No bridges, no buildings, just you, your camera, and less than optimal light. Most photographers in that situation just give up. They figure there's nothing interesting to shoot and they go home. And I mean, I get it. I used to do that as well. But if you always rely on the perfect golden light, you'll miss some of the most interesting shots that you could have taken. Because over the years, I've learned that the most captivating thing in a photo isn't always the light, it's the tension. And you can create that tension without a single ray of golden hour light, just by finding two things in your shot that have contrasting meanings. And that is often referred to as conceptual contrast or juxtaposition. And it might be the most powerful tool in this whole framework because it works anywhere, in any light, at any time of the day. And what I mean by conceptual contrast is the contrast between opposing ideas. So think of the contrast between nature and man. like in trees and man-made structures, for example, or the contrast between two different kinds of textures, like hard and liquid. Or maybe you just find two characters who just look so drastically different from one another that it makes you yourself wonder what the story between these two is and how they relate to one another. This tension is what's going to make the viewer pause for a moment to really look at your photo and ask themselves the same thing. And they'll be trying to figure out what the relationship is between these two things or people that look so different from one another. But here's the thing, context and contrast are only going to get you so far, because at some point you're going to run out of ideas. And you'll find yourself standing somewhere with your camera, and even though you know the framework, you just don't know what to shoot. And that is not always a matter of context or contrast, but more of a creativity issue. And that brings me to the third and final C, creativity. So this is where a lot of photographers often get stuck, and including me. I used to think that my photos looked boring because of bad light or just because I was in a boring location. But at some point, I learned that it really comes down to being creative. And I don't mean creative like a magic state of mind where you just create your greatest work. I think being creative is a process that is about input, analysis, and action. And if you follow this process, you learn how to deconstruct the photos of your favorite photographers that you admire, and you learn how to apply the same techniques that they are using in their photos to your own photography, regardless of the light. And this whole topic is so deep that it deserves its own breakdown. So, if you want to learn how being creative helps you take better photos in any place, in any light, watch this video next.